Alright, friends and fiends, welcome back. What's going on with you guys? Hopefully you guys are doing alright. We're going to jump into screen. So today I wanted to take another look, or what I was planning to do is I was going to take another look at my hex crawling rules. I thought, oh, this would be a good opportunity, because I felt like when I was doing the solo RPG just recently, I was like, oh, the way that I've done this has changed a little bit, or the way that I'm kind of running it off the top of my head has changed a little bit. So I wanted to go down, sit down, look at my existing rules, think about what I like about this, are there things that I want to change about it, and then kind of look through some other sources, primarily contemporary D&D, which is not really text scroll focused, but is the boilerplate for the system that I'm running, using things like the exhaustion rules and kind of focusing it off that sort of stat breakdown, that it makes more sense to use that since that's the system, even though it's designed for hex crawling, is not well, I guess it's not really what I would call very much of a hex crawler system at all. In fact, they kind of, just reading back through the books recently, and be like, they kind of talk their way around it most of the time rather than directly at hex crawling, which is interesting. Like they just needed to like give a little nod to the people who know what hex crawling is, but also I think they were maybe not wanting to introduce that to people who were maybe already overwhelmed with running things like D&D, and be like, oh, by the way, there's this whole other system of ways of doing this that is a totally different style of play for the game. So I think that's why it's that way. But if you know what you're looking for, you'll see that and you'll understand what you're looking at. Let's go ahead and, I guess the first thing, what better place to start than at the beginning? This is sort of what I have right now, or has been the kind of go-to for a minute. So don't worry about the bottom pages, the overland travel, which I separate text crawling and overland travel most of the time. So if you watched us doing the solo RPG stuff earlier, when we were trying to get our way basically to White Birch, and we were following a little bit more of this overland travel framework, and now that we've gotten beyond the borders of the marches, we're into the borderlands, that we're doing a lot more of that standard hex crawling. So just so we break it down so everybody's on the same page, why don't we just go ahead over it. So at the start of any day, you're going to break camp or set out, whatever, if you're starting from town. You're going to figure out the pace, Constitution saving throw advantage with if you have a mount or vehicle, be one of the things that changes. And track pace is a d6 per hex move, anytime that you're moving a hex or you're doing any sort of exploration act. So if you stop to do any foraging or searching or tracking, etc., basically anything that would represent taking up a significant chunk of time, is when you would track this pace. And pace is not a good wording for this. This is how old this is. One of the reasons we're re-looking at it. So once that track pace gets above the set pace, the group has exerted itself and must camp or push. Once you begin pushing, you start making active Constitution saving throws for every action you want to do after that. So that's moving another hex, or again doing one of those searching or foraging or other exploration actions. And every time that does that, we add that d6 to it again, and that becomes the DC for those Constitution saving throws. And every time you fail, you're going to grab an exhaustion level. And the exhaustion level can be removed by long resting in a safe haven or camp day. So I've changed this quite substantially, and I think anybody who's watching the solo play that we're doing right now, or is in the group that I am running right now, will already know that we are not playing directly by these rules. I have changed these a lot. These are like years old at this point. I mean, it's so old that it's in my DM binder, and I mean, I think I had this DM binder set out as it was since certainly before I started the channel. So it's been a minute. So it's a good time to sit down and look at it. So every time that we do one of those movements across hexes, or we do some sort of exploration action, we will do a random encounter roll. That's what this 1d12 is, which is pretty consistent. So if we roll a 12, there's some sort of like wilderness dressing that's often not a creature encounter, but there are some creature encounters on those tables, which if you watch Solo D&D, you know we have them in here. Grab them in. Anyways, hold on. There we go. Hard to see, but there's some tables that I have for like wilderness dressing. They're just D20 tables, kind of split up by biome. That's the things you would go. So let's say we rolled a, I don't know, like a 16 in, yeah, this, the plains, like a grasslands or a scrubland kind of place. So 16 would be a large animal herd, and then question mark, wild. So you're going to find a large herd of animals, determine whether that is a wild herd of animals, so it might be, and we're probably in the grasslands or scrubs, so probably something like a antelope or pronghorn or ibex or something like that. Or it could be something like cattle, and there could be people who are driving them. There might be drovers and herders and things like that. Could be you're in a different place. Could be sheep. It could be cows. Be anything that they might keep. Might even be a herd of horses, wild or tamed. There could be a lot of different things. So you do that throughout the day. So you have your day start, you do all this stuff, and then you get to the day, and whenever you decide that you're going to sit down for your camp for the day. So at the end of the day, you're going to roll for your food and water. I use the supply die, so that's been pretty consistent, so that's nice and easy. You're going to do any sort of morale skill challenges. Those are kind of optional, which might be something we include a little bit more in the solo game, but also maybe not. Simply because helps fight. Yep. Simply because I lost my train of thought. Oh, that's not hex crawling is not the forefront activity of that campaign. It's something that I'm doing it to model, hey, we're moving into the Borderlands and nobody within the party really knows anything about this area. So everything is kind of a new discovery. But the primary mode of play isn't find the classic D&D hex crawl style where it's like we have a base of operations, we hear rumors, we go explore to find the ruins or adventure location or whatever, go into the dungeon, grab as much treasure as we can and make it back to town to resell it. Like that's a more stereotypical hex crawl kind of adventure sandbox, and we're not really doing that because that campaign's very, very different. That's a heavily politically motivated campaign where survival is a little bit more of the issue and not quite as much adventure in that hex crawl kind of style. Give me just doing that. Hello? Why do you do this? I know, my chat's saying you can't. I don't know what that's about. So, is it that? Oh, that's why. There's an update for OBS. That's probably what the issue is. That's fine. Not the big deal. Alright. Anyways. Back to what we're doing. So day ends, you're going to make potentially this morale skill check thing where everybody has an opportunity to kind of do camp duties and a little bit to try to do a little intra-party RP. That's one of the reasons I've been here. And then they'll set watches as to who's going to watch overnight. Nobody else is sleeping. And then we do an encounter check. And a random encounter only shows up on a 1 on that. And we use a D6 instead of D12. You gain all the effects of a long rest minus your exhaustion level reduction. That's something that's I have pretty much changed because it's not super tenable. I think that I will change that going forward. I think that it might just make more sense. Well, I'm not sure yet. Not sure how I feel about it. Again, if I was playing trying to play or run a campaign, either play a solo campaign or run a campaign of D&D where this was the default type of adventure, I'd cleave much more closely to as they're written. And that really hasn't been what I've been doing. And at day in, PCs take part in an activity. This is all our morale stuff. And it's set a single DC for the skills challenge. Each player describes their attempt and rolls related to the ability check. If they majority succeed, the morale is high. They get advantage on tomorrow's set pace roll. If they more fail than succeed, they have disadvantage on pace roll. So it's a little bit of a, you have to guess about, you choose something that you're pretty good at, do that, or some other thing that you can bypass very easily. Then there's also camp day. So camp day is where you just take 24 hours off. You stay in camp and you don't move anywhere. You don't do any really productive work. You can get your exhaustion levels back. Also, PCs can do it by resting in a moving vehicle or litter where they're not disturbed throughout the day, where they can get like kind of an extra long rest in during the day. And any PCs who don't need to rest, so if there's somebody in the party who doesn't have exhaustion levels, because one of the things that will end up happening is you can end up with different levels of exhaustion levels among the PCs with this. That doesn't come up too regularly. I think we saw it in the solo RPG just recently where Christoph had a higher level of exhaustion than everybody else because he has a lower con save modifier than everybody else. So he has to make more saves. You make more saves, you're more likely to have more exhaustion. And it's one of those, just trying to add also like an added perk for investing in Constitution as an ability score. One of the things that will help with that. And then when we're doing this in camp day, you do that random encounter roll with the D12 if you find anything while you're out and about. And that's pretty much it. So that's pretty straightforward. So there are things that are in here that I'm like, oh, I like them, and then there are things in here where it's like, this very much does not work like this anymore, or I don't ever run it this way. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take everything we got here. We're gonna take all this and we're gonna move it over to our proficiency. This is stuff where I'm just kind of already putting notes in. Go ahead and insert break, page break there. And this, calling it, what's it just called? Exploration, local exploration. Local exploration and travel. That's that. So there's a lot of things that this system does not account for or does very differently than the standard hex crawling system. So let's look at what is kind of considered a standard hex crawling setup, which is, I kind of took some notes down here so we can take a look at. And we'll talk about how the system that I already had is somewhat different. So, in the standard hex crawling setup, you need to declare as the players your destination, or at least the direction you're moving in. So you might know, oh, we know something's to the northwest. We don't know how far it is. So we're going to head to the northwest. And then you set your speed, where you kind of convert walking speed to pace. And which is roughly, I think the way that D&D is doing it now is your speed as a PC divided by 10. Because everybody is pretty much 30 now in 5.5. So everybody's speed is about 3 miles per hour. So that kind of gives you an idea. I don't really like, this is one of the things where it's very different in the way that I said it. Was like, I don't care about the actual speed. That's not important to me. This does a lot of, from my angle, relatively meaningless math, because it's all you're trying to determine is how far can they move in the day. But the way that this determines that is like, it is always ironclad. You will always move the same amount. And I think any of us who have done any amount of, well, anything, knows that if there's one thing that people aren't, it's we're not machines. And we're not always going to do the same thing over and over with the same ability. Which is why in my system, instead of trying to figure out what the speed is, I always assume everybody's basically walking or basically traveling at general walking speed, which for the way that I do that, and it's about the hex scale. So here, when I was looking at it, it's like hex scales come in a number of different sizes. 3, 6, sometimes you'll come across 1, 12 or 24 mile hexes. Those, like, these are the most common ones, probably. And you'll notice that they're all kind of divided by 3, which is super helpful because most people assume, most systems assume about a 3 mile per hour walking speed. So when you have 3 mile hexes, you know you move through 1 hex an hour. And I took that and I was like, all right, that's great. If I just assume that's always the case, then each hex just becomes 1 partition, portion of time. I don't need to know the actual pace. I always just assume that everybody's traveling in one pace. And then you kind of get into weird territories where, yeah, standard walking pace is like 3.1 miles per hour or something like that. But the truth is that, like, that is not backpacking pace, which is a little bit more synonymous with something like D&D adventure travel, where you're carrying a whole bunch of heavy gear on you, and you're generally not walking on a perfectly graded level road, like paved road. So most of the time you're going up and down through forests and along game paths and stuff like that. So I went in trails. So I look at backpacking because I remember this and be like, oh, the average person or the average adventuring party should be traveling like 30 miles a day. And I was like, that is like way too much. That's like, can you go that fast? Yes, absolutely. Regularly, like every day? No. And even if you go back and look at like historical records of things like armies marching, they're very often taking entire camp days, which is why I started involving the camp days. It's like they can go for 2 or 3 days pretty hard, but then they gotta rest. Usually gotta take at least 1 day in camp, rest up before they start again. So it's like I wanted something that kind of took all that information and compressed it into a more gamified experience. How I got to this, where we're setting paces and we're tracking paces, even though pace, again, is not a good word for, I don't think I ever call it pace anymore. Because pace is how fast you go. This is more about, third terming it is more like effort or your stamina track. Or doing things like that rather than pace, because it's not pace. Exactly. And I also did that to avoid things like quick pace or slow pace. Now, do we have people who, if I run, groups where they want to do quick pace? Yeah, sure. So quick pace is very easy. It's like, yeah, you get to make it, but you're gonna double up on sort of the effort expenditure. Or do things like give you the saves at disadvantage once you're kind of like gassed. You'll be able to do that. And slow pace, just, I assume, my normal pace is assuming, because I use hexes that are what I call league hexes, that they are 2 nautical miles, which is, what's that on that? Yeah, okay. That's what. Alright. Yeah, so a nautical mile is about 1.15 miles. So when I use this as a nice rubric for how I look at my pace for how I construct a hex. I'm like, yeah, that's about average. That's a good pace for like somebody who's laying down with gear walking. That will serve, and it's quite realistic. Like you can expect a speed about like that. And those of you who are familiar with the system understand that I use nautical miles specifically because they flow immediately into degrees of longitude and latitude. Means that I can very easily scale a world map all the way down to hexes that are 2 nautical miles wide, and not have a lot of weird math like this trying to do that, which pretty much all other scales of hex are going to give you. That's why I do it that way. I also have terrain modifiers. That's not a thing that I was really addressing in the original one, but it is something that I kind of want to add to. Like things like the quick pace aren't super important because I'm not tracking finite time. Which is what quick and slow pace are more concerned about the amount of time that you're using to move. And that's not a concern in my system. My system is more like once you get past your set pace and you begin pushing, you have done what is considered a full day of travel and or whatever you were doing. So it's like at this point, it's starting to get like dark. And you really need to start thinking about, oh, do we want to find some place to camp? Or if you're going to move forward, you're going to be moving forward now into the evening and into the darkness. And we had a couple of PCs who had to do that not too long ago in our campaign. And I was like, well, you guys are deep in the night now, trying to push because you were trying to get to a place very like that day, and you are many miles away from that place still. So they were able to do that, but they kept taking like levels of exhaustion when they were failing their checks. And that check keeps going up and up and up while they do that. So other parts, kind of a standard hex setup. So the terrain modifiers is not something I have right now, but it is something that I want to look at. One of the things that's kind of the major difference maker is like off-road versus on-road travel. And me, my assumption is like this is why this is totally different. Why overland travel down here is totally different than local exploration travel. It's like, well, if you were just following a road, that's not particularly difficult to do. It's generally not particularly dangerous, though it can be, but most of the time it's not dangerous. And so it's not about like any sort of wilderness encounters you have or ruins you might uncover. It's like everybody knows what's on the road. If you have a big long road that runs right next to some ruins, you know that those ruins have probably been well scoured and pilfered of anything that's useful in them. So there's really no reason to go in and take a look at them, because there's a road that runs right next to them. There's nothing worthwhile inside them. And it turned off for me. Quiet. Oh, it's just quiet. That's why. It's just quiet. My headphones turned down on. That's why. That makes more sense. Alright. So biomes, and the way that this generally works, not always, every system's a little bit different because there is no one unified system for hex crawling. It's more that, okay, if you're traveling across things like the plains, open plains, flat ground, you're generally going at 100% pace. If you're going at like a woodland area or something like that, or some hills, it's like, oh, suddenly you're going at like 50% pace. So instead of going 3 miles, now you're going Like, let's say we're using 3 mile hexes. That's a very easy example for this. Well, even though we're going to do a quarter here in a second. It'd be like, okay, so if you were going through 1 hex of like open grasslands, you'd be like, okay, it takes you 1 segment of your time and pace in a day to get through that. No problem. Going through sort of a forest or some hills or central hills, stuff like that. Oh, well, it takes 2 parts of your time to go through that. Then you have like the really, really heavy, like really dense stuff, like deep swamps and things like that. Oh, that's kind of a 4-to-1 ratio. It's going to take you 4 lengths of time to get across that same amount of time. So if you could pass this one in an hour, this is going to take you 2 hours. Getting through the swamp is going to take you 4 hours. And then you have places that are just fully impassable, like mountain ranges that don't have a pass through them. Not really a place that you can move through. They're more like blocking terrain. Impassable terrain, in the same way that we have things like impassable or blocking terrain. We're doing dungeon crawling and like encounter maps. We're doing combat encounters. Same kind of idea. And then looking at things like having bridges or fords or tunnels or roads that increase the terrain speed and make other places that would be impassable passable. So, while being on a road is probably not significantly faster than traveling across open ground, I mean, functionally it is. Absolutely is. But as far as D&D gamification is, not really. But if you're going through that forest, there's a big difference between trying to navigate your way through an old growth forest and then trying to walk along a road that's going through the forest, which would then take your pace, which would take you twice as long to get through. Be like, no, it's going to bump it up and you'll go just as fast as you would on a road that's in open ground. And same thing down here. If you had like a swamp, but the swamp's got like a boardwalk on it or something, that's some elevated pathway, or somebody's made berms or something to allow for faster, or there's just a road through it. Well, you take anything like that and you can move this up from 25% to 50%. Like, the swamp's still difficult to get through, it's still super windy and things, but you're going significantly faster than you were. Instead of taking you 4 hours to get through the swamp, it's going to only take you 2. And then things like this space would be like, oh, well, you can't get over these mountains. But if there's a pass there, sure, you can get through this mountain hex, but it's still going to take you 4 hours. Like, it's still a bunch of switchbacks and like going up and inclines and very difficult to do. But you can now actually get through it. And so that's what this aspect is down here. It's going to increase your speed and make those things passable. Water's another big one. Water in general, you can't pass unless you have some sort of vehicle or other means to do it. Again, like there's a bridge or a ford or something like that that'll allow you to get across rivers. But if you're moving on things like a big lake, like we have Green Lake in the solo RPG, you can't just swim that. You have to have some sort of vehicle that's going to be able to take you across. And each vehicle and mounts and those kinds of things, they all have speeds. We don't have to do a lot of that work. Now, anytime that I get that, like I said, I'm less concerned with the actual speed of the vehicle or the mount, because you really only go as fast as the slowest member of your party, which when you're doing a large retinue, this is very like old school D&D thing when hex crawling kind of came out and became very popular, is that you only travel as fast as the slowest person in your group. Now, unless you get horses for all of your hirelings, which is very expensive, at least some of your hirelings and retainers and link boys or whatever porters are going to be walking on foot. So it really doesn't matter how fast your mount is, assuming you want to keep the group together. Then you're only as fast as somebody walking. Doesn't matter if you have wagons with you, doesn't matter if you have carts, doesn't matter if you have big, strong, fast horses. Unless you're just going to leave those people behind, you go as fast as they walk. So this is a little inconsequential most of the time, with the exception of kind of water. And for water, I just kind of assume the same pace. The only thing that comes special about water is that, especially if you're doing something like a sailing ship, is that if you schedule your shifts correctly, you can sail all the way through the night because you only need a few people actually working a ship, keep it going. So that way you don't have to anchor every night. And that means that you get an extra like 8 hours back for travel in a day. So that becomes the thing that makes it faster and not necessarily its actual speed. It's the fact that it goes 1/3 more than any other type of vehicle or mount can take you. And that you can move a whole lot of stuff in it. A whole lot of people and a whole lot of things very, very easily. That's the strength of having any sort of like water vehicle. And in a lot of systems, the terrain that you're in or that biome modifies not just the tables that you use for random encounters, but how likely it is for you to have a random encounter. Usually with things like a road being the least likely, and then kind of in the middle of nowhere, deep wilderness, be much more likely. You're going to run across some sort of trouble. I also use navigation checks to stay on course. That is something that I sometimes do. Sometimes I don't. It kind of depends. You have to make a lot of decisions when you're running any sort of exploration gameplay about what is the important part of this. The important part about them, the more important for the characters to get to the place they're getting to. Does the travel or journey there signify some sort of important part of the adventure? So you have something like Lord of the Rings where most of it is walking. That's most of the story is walking, and most of the challenges are concerned with walking. So it's not. And then they walked for a while, and then they were at Mount Doom. Walking is most of the thing. But also, rarely do they get lost. Do they get lost? Yeah, sometimes. But it's not a super huge part of the book. It's more about people are actively after them, or they run across patrols, or they are just around a war that's going on and trying to get through that area. Those are most of the challenges. And then sometimes they get lost, or they don't know where they're going. So you have to decide whether that's going to be an important part of or not. Like for our solo RPG, navigation is a little bit important, but not super important. Like we had last time, and luckily Gertrude got a natural 20, and so it was like, oh, we know if we just head straight northwest, and she did so well that I'm gonna let that success ride. So we're not gonna make more navigation checks. She has a dead reckoning on it. The group is good to go. They know where they need to go. But we also had things like back in Carjuntan with Leah, where like, oh, well, here's the box. And so we know as long as we don't get too far off the path, we should hit the search area. Because we don't know the actual location we're going to, but we have the general area, like some landmarks around it that we know it's kind of bounded by. And so that kind of exploration gameplay is a lot more about going hex by hex and searching to try to find the place. You know you're in the right area, but you don't know the exact location of the place you're looking for. And so that's the primary mode of gameplay. It's not necessarily the getting to that place. It's now we're in the place, now we got to find it. Now we got to cut our way, a very pulp adventure. We got to cut our way through the jungle looking for the lost city that's in here somewhere. El Dorado or whatever it is. But it's not necessarily about getting to the area where you think it's at. But sometimes it is. So we modeled some of that for our solo RPG because we knew that there were people after Reed. So we knew that it was going to be important that there is always a chance that somebody was going to come out of the woodwork and either try to kidnap him or kill him. Some sort of political rival or somebody else, we're not sure yet, would be coming after him. And you have random encounter tables per biome. Do I have some of those in my DM binder? I do. I will be honest, I don't use them very often. Mainly because if I know that the players and the PCs are headed in a very specific direction, I will usually make kind of a bespoke encounter table for that, random encounters, just to make sure it stays fresh. Because the tables that I have only have like 6 entries per biome, and at all types of different CR ratings. So it's actually just a little bit easier if I kind of keep it a little bit more bounded, specific to what's going on in that campaign. But you certainly could do it that way. And in most text crawl systems, you have a point of interest or a site, location site event trigger. So being that if you go into the hex where there is an already established pre-written point of interest, like a monster lair, a dungeon, a settlement, or something like that, players immediately find it. The PCs immediately find it. They don't have to search on it. And when you're doing a 1 mile hex, I think that's very reasonable. That's just normal visibility. Assuming that you're not in something like a deeply overgrown forest or swamp or something like that, likelihood is that you have enough visibility and things are going to be close enough that you'll be able to see it once you get close to it. Now, that changes when the hex scale goes up. Suddenly, if you're working with 24-mile hexes, and you're like, oh, well, as soon as you get into the hex, you immediately spot the thing that you're looking for. Like, that's like it's still a very huge area to look through. Again, if that's an important thing for you or not. For me, I like the aspect being like, oh, you know you're in generally the right area, but you do have to go looking for stuff. And so in my system, it's like if you don't immediately hit a point of interest. So the way that I run it typically is usually to how I stock points of interest is I roll a d6, and depending on whether it's in like the heartlands or the marches or the frontier, or it's deep in the wilds, depends on how likely it is that there's going to be a point of interest in that hex. Because if you're in occupied areas, it's almost every hex has something in it. There's a whole bunch of stuff real close to each other. But once you get out into like the far wilds, there's only a 1 in 6 chance that the hex has anything in it. And so what I do to mimic that when we're doing exploring is that every time we move into a new hex, I let them roll a d20, group roll a d20. And if they hit that requisite number, the same number that I would be rolling on the d6, then they find a point of interest in there. And that's a way, if I don't already have a scheduled point of interest, if I have a scheduled point of interest, they'll still probably make the roll, but I know what's going to be in there, which is very different than what we're doing with the solo RPG, where it's like, I'm purposely not filling out the hexes because I want it to be a discovery for the entire, for me as a player, and solo play is a little bit like that. It's like, I have to leave room to be surprised by stuff. Or else, if I coordinate everything beforehand, I'm just writing a weird story with occasional dice rolls that are not as meaningful as they could be. But instead, leaving a lot of that up to chance. You're like, I don't know what's here, and I specifically am not building it out beforehand. So if I'm doing that, then that system works really, really well. Where, if you have, like, we're in the wilderness right now. If you're in the wilderness and you're rolling for it, there's only a 1 in 6 chance that usually there would be a point of interest there, which means there's only a 5% chance on a d20 that you're going to find it. Now, that doesn't mean if I don't roll that for the PCs or the players don't roll that there is not a point of interest in there. The only way to know for sure is to take this exploration action. Where's it at? Yeah, per mover action. One of the things they can do as that explore action is that they can search the hex. And if they search the hex, they will know for sure, because they're spending the time to do it. They're spending the resource, that pace resource, to do it. If they spend time, they're like, all right, we're not moving forward. Everybody fan out. We're going to walk across this place really slowly. If they do that, then they're going to for sure know whether there is a point of interest or not in there. If there is a point of interest, if I was running like the campaign that I'm running right now that has a lot of hex crawl stuff in it, if they go through that area and they decide to search that area and there is a point of interest there, they will immediately find it. Be like, great, we'll set the pace, or we'll mark off your effort, and you guys find this as you are searching through the area. But if they're just in the process of traveling from point A to point B, there's only a chance they're going to find something in there. Which is really great opportunity to be like, you that I try to impart to my players, be like, you guys should talk to lots of people. Try to get rumors about everything, because that'll give you some indication about where stuff might be on the map. That way it gives you a better inclination about what hexes maybe are worth the time to search for something, rather than not. And again, once I get down to like that smallest size of hex, which for me is 2 nautical miles across, so what was it, 2.3 miles? So if that's the case, you still need to search it, but there is a chance they might find something. Like, for me, that makes a lot of sense. It'd be like, you don't have to spend a bunch of time here, but if you spent 20 minutes kind of combing the countryside real quick, you're going to find the thing that you were looking for easily. But it still represents the time for being organized and doing that thing and coming back together and sharing yours. But there could be situations where you're like, I leave that up to sort of dungeon master or game master discretion. Feel like, if you know there's something like a settlement in this hex, and your players walk into it, and you know it's a small hex, you can just tell them that you guys, in the distance above the treetops, you see plumes of smoke that seem to be coming up. Not from some sort of wildfire, but probably from chimneys. Or hearths. No, they'll clue them in and be like, oh, there's probably somebody who lives here. We should probably go find them. And then it's just about following it. You're like, oh, you guys follow the plumes of smoke, and you find this small village. And doing that instead. Here. That pretty much covers pretty much all of it. The most hex crawls, because of the pacing, are very, very focused on tracking time. Here's the thing that I'm not particularly, I'd like for that to be more abstract. One of the reasons is kind of goes to this right here. So this system, as we probably walk through it, you may have thought this, and like, oh, that system seems like pretty useful. No, oh, if we had, based off our pace, we have the ability to do 6 hexes in a day, usually. Whatever. Let's use 3-mile hexes. So it's like, oh, we know that we could probably do, they kind of assume you walk for 10 hours. We can do up to like 10 hexes very easily. And like, great. All right, so we go through 1 hex that does this, then we have to go through another one that takes 2, and then we have to go through another one, and that one takes, all right, 4. And then what happens when you're into the next one, and maybe that one takes 2 more, and now you're up to 9, and then you're like, oh, now we gotta go through another one of these swamp hexes. Well, we don't have enough remainder. Now I have to remember that you are 25% through this hex traveling it. And I don't want to do that as a game master. I don't want to. There's enough bookkeeping on my end that I don't want to do this very fiddly kind of bookkeeping. I'm like, you either make it through that hex or you don't. There's not really any. I don't want a lot of in-betweens, and this gives you a whole lot of ways to have a lot of in-betweens most of the time, where you're only halfway through hexes. And I want it to be you're either in the hex, you're either in the middle of the hex or you're in the middle of the next hex. There's no in-between that I want to worry about. Which is another reason why I kind of moved away from this system. I'm like, oh, there's a lot of little weird fiddly stuff. And the same reason, like, tracking food and water resources, and those are usually things I just fold in together. as rations, because yeah, I understand that when you're in the desert, it's going to be more difficult to find water, but that's also creating an entire system where it's really only important in like one biome that you're going to be adventuring in. And I don't know how much you guys have played D&D, but I've played D&D quite a bit, and haven't spent a ton of time in deserts, mainly because there's not a lot of stuff to do in most deserts. That's kind of the issue with it, is that anything that would be in the desert gets buried by the desert. So unless you're going to look for something that you already know where it is, and you're doing that, again, trying to do very search-oriented gameplay where you're trying to find the right spot where some civilization that's been covered over by the sands from eons ago, you're doing that. Otherwise, there's not really a ton of reasons to be going through the desert other than to get through the desert, and assuming that you know how long it's going to take you to go through the desert, you're going to bring enough supplies to get through the desert. So assuming that nothing terrible happens to those supplies, which doesn't happen in most D&D games, supplies are, like most player character gear, is considered sacrosanct, where it's understandable as a player. It sucks to be like, and you lose your armor or whatever, or something like that, or you get your horse stolen or whatever. Like that's, I mean, most people have a bad taste in the mouth because a DM has like stolen magic items from them. But food and water, even though it would make more sense in a desert for somebody to try to raid your camp to steal water, and that would become the important thing in that encounter, was trying to protect your water supply. There's also just ways to get water in the desert. There's, you know, an oasis, or being able to dig in the right spot, or talking with the locals and knowing things like that. So I mean, it's not as big a deal for most D&D adventuring that I think it's worth tracking independently. It's more, for me, it's more like rations. You either have supplies or you don't have supplies. And because I want to make that a little bit more iffy, that's one of the reasons I use the resource die. Whereas that, if I was doing the resource die, maybe in some place like a desert, I'd be like, oh, because you guys are going through this particularly parched place, I'm going to have you guys roll the resource die with disadvantage. And that's when you're like, oh, you want to make sure that we bring them out so that way we can carry more supplies with us, because it's more likely that we're going to lose supplies along the way. Because technically, the way the resource die mechanic works is that you could have infinite supplies. They're like quantum supplies. They're not real until they become one unit of supply. Otherwise, they're just kind of an amorphous blob of potential supplies. And I like that system a lot better. That's become a lot more popular in some lighter weight TTRPGs in general, where they're like, oh, you have adventuring gear, and you can pull, it costs you like one slot of supplies to pull out some useful tool, like Dungeon World's like that, where it's like, oh, it just costs you one supply to have that specific item you need on hand. Even though you didn't say you had it with you and it wasn't on your character sheet, you can kind of assume that you had it. Similar, but not quite like something like Blades in the Dark, where you're going to have that flashback moment to be like, this is why I have the thing. Different take, but addressing it in the same way. And this is just the stuff that's in 5e and 5.5 that I was going through. There's not too much different in here. 5.5 is a little bit more concerned with journey stages, which is a lot closer to my overland travel rules. But it does kind of give you this idea of like things that can happen as challenges during that, which I do. And encounter distance related to noise and visibility, which is technically a hex crawl rule, but most standard hex crawl rules are very OSR to begin with, and OSR already functions that's really more about like the combat design than something specific to exploration. It's just added here in 5e or 5.5 because they kind of assume that you're going to be coming across monsters generally within 30 feet of each other, within a move, so that way people who are playing melee builds can get in there and do melee stuff. But it is, if you're looking for a very interesting way to change up how your party maybe deals with combat, would be changing the encounter distance. So instead of starting an encounter where everything's within like 30 or maybe 60 feet, be like, what does the encounter look like if the encounter starts and the party and the monsters are 200 feet apart, where they're outside the range of most spells and ranged weapons? Do you decide to flee? If they flee, do you pursue them? Does it become like a chase scene instead? Is that worthwhile for you, for creatures you might not know anything about? Or can you do some sort of thing where you're starting very far apart, where you can, wave like I was gonna say white flag, not surrender though, but something to show that like, hey, you come in peace, and maybe you just want to trade information or items with these people, these creatures, assuming they're like humanoid creatures, even if they're monstrous humanoids, gnolls and orcs and goblins, and kobolds, and all that fun stuff. This is what we have for right now. So I just copied and pasted everything in here. Let's start screwing stuff up. Let's start chopping this apart a little bit. So what about this has changed from how I actually run it most of the time? Well, set pace has totally changed. And we're also not going to... I'm going to call this set out. And we're not going to set pace. We're going to... effort, which I've changed to be, instead of having them always make a con save, what they have been doing is having them, I'm just taking 10. They have a we're going to take 10 on save. Take 10 if you did not play like 3rd edition, I think primarily where I know it from, or Pathfinder, is that it's the same thing. It's where we get passive perception from. It's assuming that you roll like a 10 on the die all the time, and that's kind of your general, in the same way it is your general awareness and passive perception. This is your day's effort. It assumes on most days you have about this much effort in the tank. And so that way, if you're trying to push above that, that's when you start making saves. And so we did have it being advantage if you have a mount or a vehicle. That I think I'm going to change. Do I want to change that? Because right now I hadn't been using the biome to impact it, because that's one of the things I want to change. Okay, so 1. Put down here additions. So addition number 1 or 2 biomes for and difficulty. I want to diversify those biomes in like the difficulty, what it takes. That's not something I've been doing, and that's been now running a campaign where they spend a lot of time in like the coastal shallows and mangroves and stuff like that because they're on an island or they're in the jungle. I realize, oh, I'd like for there to be a little something there. Otherwise I feel like, and again, this is probably my own perspective because I get to see all the information. I'm like, oh, it's very samey as far as how much they can travel most of the time. Now that was originally handled by the con save aspect of that, but having played this system many years now, been like, oh, it really sucks if you roll really low. It sucks even more if you roll really low and the rest of the party rolls average or better. and you're like, well, I get to move like 2 hexes today, and then I'm going to be just full exhausted. And pretty much useless. And the rest of the party's like, I guess we'll wait then. So I was like, alright, so this did not work out the way I wanted to. So I do want that, and I do want some sort of benefit to using mounts vehicles. Aside from the benefits that those already give, which is more supplies. So I've talked about my resource die system quite a lot, but in mine, as if I came up with it. Resource dies were around for a long time before I walked onto the scene. But I don't see a lot of people use them this way. So in my games, the way that I like to run this is that instead of like tracking normal rations, you have a D6. So anytime that you finish a day or you do something in which that resource would be impacted, we saw this in the solo RPG because I was just doing it recently because they were doing it for arrows. So when it comes to arrows, which is very easy one in the model, any resource, you can carry a D6 of it with you at any time. Anytime you use that resource, you got to roll the die. If you roll a 2 through 6, great, no change. It only happens. The only thing that's important happens if you roll a 1. If I roll a 1 on the D6, it means, oh, I've definitely lost some resources. You can look down at your resources and be like, oh, I definitely have less resources. And so you replace that 1d6 with a 1d4. The lower the die, the more likely it is you're going to roll a 1. So it does have this kind of resource death spiral, where you always kind of want to keep as many resources as possible. You want to keep topped up all the way. Losing resources is not fun. And each group is different. Some groups I ask them like, hey, do you want to pool everybody's resources together and we'll just track one thing? Or do you guys all want individual resources? I think I've only had one group take me up on putting all the resources together. Generally, everybody wants their everybody wants the resources separate. I don't know why. It does give you more flexibility if you do that, though. But it does mean that the more you roll, the more likely you are to fail. But it gives you the tools to be able to handle that. Because one of the ways you can handle that is that you can decide, let's say that we have somebody who has a d6 of arrows and somebody who only has 1 arrow left, which is what happens when you roll a 1 on 1d4. It goes down to you have 1 thing of this supply left. So if they only have 1 arrow left, or 1, we should say, maybe encounters use of an arrow left. So, they've got a handful of arrows, not very many. Well, if somebody still has a d6 of that resource, they can split the resource. It means they can take their d6 and they can go down to a d4. And when they do that, the person who also has that resource, who takes that on, gets a d4 in that resource. So you can split it up a little. But the nice thing about taking mounts with you is it shifts the maximum size die you can have. So if you were like, oh, but we have a horse. Great, you have a horse, so instead of carrying a d6 of arrows, now you can carry extra arrows with you. You can carry a d8 of arrows with you. Oh, you decide, and that would be like for a cart too. Oh, you want to carry, you have a wagon. Well, now you can carry a d10 with you. Now, whatever you guys are like, we're going to go plumb the dungeon, but you can't take the wagon with you, so you got to split out your resources. So you can have separate resource stacks where, and this is one of the things that I do with my current ranger that I play, is like, hey, I remember that I've got a d10 on the boat for arrows, and then I have a d6, which is my personal supply of arrows. So if we get down in the dungeon or under the waves or whatever, and I've used all my arrows up, or I'm down to a d4, I can go back up to the ship and be like, okay, I want to jump back up to a d6, so this d10 will go down to a d8. And that'll still be my reserve, and I'm ready to go still. It just makes things, I like it because it's very simple. It adds this level of randomness, which is more like assuming that after every like with the arrows, assuming after every encounter that you are actively trying to recover the resources you have. So we don't need to do any sort of rolls about can you find the arrows, are the arrows in good condition. This one die roll tells me all of that. Tells me how many you could find and whether they are still in good condition or not. You can use them to fire them again. And suitably, when you do things like forge actions, it allows you to say, okay, you got enough forge this time that you guys can do your rations die rolls with advantage. And so unless I get 2 1s, like I just did, which is pretty low chance, but case in point, it does happen, then it would go down to D4. But same thing, like if I had a D4 resource and we did foraging, I wouldn't have to take that one. I could keep this 4. I've also done things where it's like if they find a resource, like they're plumbing the dungeon and they find a larder, like a pantry that's got a whole bunch of stuff in it. They're like, okay, you guys can, if you guys have less than a D6, you can roll your die. In this instance, it'd be a D4. If you roll a 4, you get to go up to a D6. You find enough stuff to resupply. Great, awesome. You found enough stuff to resupply, you can get to go back up to a D6 on it. But remember, D6 is the most you can carry on your person. But if you were in an area where you were looking through some old ruins and you had like your wagon with you, and you could resupply up the wagon too. So I like that stuff. That is one of the uses for these guys. So that's more supplies. And I also want the benefit to be like, the things that mounts and vehicles give you more, because it's not really speed that they give you. We talked about that earlier. They don't give you speed. What they give you is really comfortability. Is that they're just comfort. They're a much more comfortable way to travel. And so you go, okay, well, if it's about comfortability, then they should be able to go longer. So have, so we're going to say reserve energy expenditure. So on the front, I was being like, oh, well, you can change that by doing the day's effort and be like, okay, well, if you had it, maybe I'd let you have advantage on that roll, which is essentially giving you +5. And the math's a little but yeah. So instead of taking 10, you would take 15 on that con save. But then I was like, but you're going over different types of terrain. And depending on the type of terrain you're in, that vehicle or animal might actually not be useful. Like, for example, in the solo RPG, we have the donkeys with us. And the donkeys are great as long as we're on land. But the donkeys don't really help us when we're in the swamp and we need to swim or take the boat. Now, the boat also helps us. So those two kind of cancel each other out. But if we only had one of those things and not the other, it wouldn't work right. Like, I couldn't give the benefit of the boat for the entire day of effort by having them take 15. But they maybe only use the boat for 1 hex. They'll be like, okay, so how do I model that? So I think the way to model that is I have to change this part down here. So I was really trying to avoid doing, because this is where things will start to get fiddly, if I start also using this to change based on the terrain they're in. So. But if I represent that as potentially shifts and then do it table, maybe it'll be easier. Which is very much how, like, the 5th edition one is doing it. I know it's 5.5. So this table is really nice. One of the more useful things in here, especially in the exploration area. It kind of gives you what the maximum pace is. counter distance, the DCs for foraging and navigations. But what I want to do that is like, what would the effort be? Which would be, for us, would be maximum pace. So. And make something like that that'll be a little bit more like my biome diversification 2d6 table. And it'd probably be a little bit more like that. That's not the right. There we go. They are named incorrectly in OBS. That's helpful. Windows are. Those are the things that we want to model. So we're going to set the pace. Still going to be that take 10. So I can't do the advantage with Mallory. Because, like, if we were only doing ocean going stuff and you were on a ship, yeah, we could probably get away with it. But biomes tend to be varied. And they don't always work like that. So we're going to, so we're replacing anything that said pace with effort. We're going to track effort. The one thing that I realized with track effort is that I needed to lower it. So it's no longer a D6, it's a D4. Because I realized very early on after making this to be like, oh, people are just not going far enough. That doesn't make sense. Because you can roll 3 6s and have an 18 and be done for the day in 3 hexes. And I was like, traveling not quite 7 miles. It's like, yeah, there's circumstances where that makes sense, but probably not. So I started thinking about like, oh, well, what if I went with a D4? It's like, well, on average, that'll be a 2.5 is the roll. So 5, 10, 15. So that should cover most things, and that would be 6 hexes at 15. And that feels a little bit more reasonable for just open land traveling. Because that'll get you, what, 2.3 times 6, whatever that is. Can't do that math off the top of my head. Yeah, so about 14 miles. And that's pretty good. That's pretty much right in the saddle, right in the cradle of where we want to be. Yeah, that works a lot better. Now, this would be 24 per X move or duration action. Again, that's we want to do foraging, searching, tracking, etc. And then we can just. And I have also changed primarily for the same sort of reason. So instead of being greater than or equal to, just greater than. It's a lot easier to track that way too. Kind of going with the meets it beats it as far as putting things in the player's benefit. Press group. Really should be started to themselves. Must camp or push. Very simple. Something here that's push. That's con save. Track. Right, we're not doing pace. Effort. Fail. So, on fail. Gain exhaustion 11. and this is pretty archetypal of my attempts at doing design, is that usually I will make things just really, really hard on the PCs and then start rolling things back. I'd rather make it too hard than make it, or that, I guess that's just really just my design tendencies. I'm more likely to kind of like grind PCs into the ground and then start to pull back things where I'm like, oh, this is more difficult than it should be. So that's the same thing with this exhaustion level being removed only by long resting in a safe haven or a camp day. And I don't do that anymore. I haven't been doing that for a very long time. Because it's already tough enough to be like, oh, the whole point of tracking the effort is to get them to stop for the day. So when does the day end? And they're already getting punished for the day end because they're going to have to, well, punished. Because they have to stop moving, so time is already an issue for them if they're on some sort of time push, that timed aspect of a quest or adventure they're doing. They're already working as the clock and they already don't want to stop. If I'm adjudicating that correctly, if I'm running the game correctly, then if I've set the time pressure, they should be very cognizant of it and think about, maybe we should push, or maybe we shouldn't push, or is it worth the level of exhaustion to get another hex further closer to our destination, maybe or maybe not. But when that stuff works out really well, you get nice cool things like having characters that pick up like multiple levels of exhaustion but get back to the place that they're trying to get to the day before something very important happens, or the night before something very important happens, and then they get there, they tell people about it, and then they just kind of collapse. Which kind of gives that, the, I guess, fable of marathon, right? The guy runs from marathon to let people know about this, and then just kind of collapses. Like, great, then it's modeling the thing that I wanted to do. I want it to be a thing where, oh, you can do this thing, but you really have to push yourself, and the more you push yourself, the more difficult it is. There's also things that I've considered to be like, hey, one of the things we could do for like mounts is that we could use the animals constitution saving throw. But honestly, the PCs generally have better con saves than the animals do, unfortunately. So it's one of those things where it sounds like a really good idea, and then you start looking at the math and be like, this won't work. They actually have like con scores of 10. They're actually worse than the characters. Unless I did a thing where it would be like a phase 2, it's like now you have to walk the animals and you can keep going, but now you have to immediately do saves. Maybe I could foresee myself doing that. I mean, we could try to model that real quick. Okay, let's look for a moment. Let's pull them up. Go for, I need a horsey horse. Yeah, let's assume riding horse. Yeah, see, they have a con save of +1. So that would give us a benefit of 11. And then let's do 6 plus 1. All right, I just happen to roll somebody who's going to have a freaking 18 out the gate in con. What a wild time. All right, so if we went horse, and they've got DC 11, and then they like effort 11. We have our PC who has effort. All right, question. They have this much con, which makes me think there's no reason they're not a barbarian. Are they trained on just for fun? And no. Okay, perfect. Why not? Maybe they're a fighter, because I think fighters get trained in strength and dex and not con. All right. Well, regardless, they're gonna have that 18, which is gonna get them a +4. So if we went throughout the day, we can model this quickly. Okay, 1. This is just as it is, not giving them the benefits of that. Okay, so they're able to go 4, which would take them to 14. So if our character got off their horse and went one more, they could squeeze out one more before. That's not terrible, and that's pretty much the best case scenario. There are some PCs that don't have a positive modifier, and there are also other kinds of mounts that you could have. So not super unreasonable. So I guess maybe let's lock that in as a solid maybe. Well, let's model that. Like, what if they did get the advantage, which would be disadvantage? Might they be able to go 1? Like our solo game on Saturday. Rolled so many ones. We got so far. So as you can see, if you roll right, you can make it a long ways. There you go. So, with this arrangement, they could get through 9 hexes, which is way more than 4. Which would be, that's... So, just over 20 miles. And that is almost as good as you can get. Really, the total that you could get. And then they could keep pushing. Or like I said, they could try to push with the horse, which they get a +1 to the score. Or they can get off. If they get off the horse, they've got a DC 14. So technically, they could keep going. They don't get the advantage anymore. And they could get 1 more hex in. Before they need to start making the save. Now, they got a +4 to save. So if they wanted to then try to go 1 more. You do anything. If we roll 14 or higher, they're going to be okay. We do. Then go another hex. So they get up to 20. So we could roll for it, but unlikely they would make it. At this point, I know if I was that PC, I'd be like, we can stop. We did yeoman's work today. we covered 12 hexes. We are doing fine, which is how many miles? Nope, that's division. So you can get a little under 30 miles. 27.5 miles. That's a clip. That makes sense. I think it runs into some particular issues about when you start getting vehicles in the mix. Because vehicles, if they're boats or stuff, like you're doing the sailing or you're doing the paddling, or if it's like a wagon that's pulled by a horse or a mule or an ox or something like that, they actually don't get to rest. Unless you were literally like, we are going to stop moving and split the party. Now, given the party that I currently run for in my home game, they would be likely to do that. They split up like crazy. And I mostly don't murder them. Mostly. Alright, so back in the tank. But I think we've got some ideas where it's like, alright, well, they could be. That feels like if they have a vehicle or a mount, they would get advantage on. So then that means for stylizing is like I have to start at the road aspect. Now, I could presumably do things like double advantage, where you roll 3 dice and take the best result. But I don't think I want to do that. It's just a little extra finicky bit, especially when you're rolling d4s most of the time, which are not fun to roll already. Move on from it. Unless you have one of the nice d4s that's not like a little pyramid. So technically not a pyramid. Okay. Well, to be thought of. You continue noodling with. We might practice this in the solo RPG since we're still moving around. See how I feel about it. Because I think already getting the bonus is good enough. And it's the same bonus you might get from just traveling on the road. But generally, I don't do road travel for local exploration like this. Okie doke. So actually, we don't need all this extra stuff about apply situational advantage. Yeah. I guess we do need to keep that aspect of it. We're going to keep this part. And then here. This is basically any notable thing that you do. It's not moving. That should get us all of this stuff. And this would also go down. And there'll be a and counter roll. Counter. Oh, wait. Enough after it? Yeah. Oh, nice. They're going to give me an orphan. Good. We'll take the day in here and drop it in. Oh. What happens at the end of the day? So, we've changed this food and water. We're just going to do a ration check. And we'll just call it ration. The only, like I said, I think the only place that I would incur disadvantage would be specifically if they were in the desert. So I think I'm gonna note that, but that's gonna have there's a big old asterisk on it. Be like, maybe we'll walk this back. Disadvantage. Reversing. Desert, or we'll say other. Split. Hey, is this my own notes? How you doing, Buddha? My own notes, or do you plan to make it a play guide? Yeah. I mean, these are really kind of retooling notes I already have for myself. But yeah, I mean, additionally, I'd probably need to clean it up. It's very much shorthand. But yeah, I could definitely see myself putting this out as a guide for people. I'll probably throw it up on like a drive-through RPG as a hey, what you want thing. Why not? Sometimes that ends up with me having to explain a lot more because everything's kind of shortened for my own personal usage. I usually go with my DM's finder. All right, and then we're going to. So this does alter some things like camp days, for sure. I'm gonna have a morale skill challenge, which will remain optional. I do it sometimes. There's one of the things I kind of want to push groups to do a little bit more. I think I want to set it up where it's either they do this or they do. I think I have. I do not. It's in my game bag. I have these like campfire cards that are like, here's a question to like kind of spur intra-party RP. Like, what do you guys talk about when you're sitting around the campfire? Sometimes I use them like when they're traveling too. Like, hey, what do you guys talk about when you're traveling? Because you guys don't walk for like 8 hours in silence. You're gonna talk about something. So just to try to give them the ability, try to make that characterization, be like, your characters spend a lot of time with each other. They should know things about each other. And it's one of the things where it's like, in the group that I play with, our group is really, really good about doing that stuff. But it's probably one of the few groups I've played in my many, many years at D&D where the players really make an effort to go do that stuff on their own accord. We spend time talking to other PCs and other NPCs. It helps that we're a crew on a ship. And so you're like, well, you're stuck on a ship. So I go talk to this NPC about this thing that's going on. Or be like, I need to talk to you about this other PC and make sure everybody's all on the same page about the weird stuff that's going on with them. There's always weird stuff that's going on with our PCs. And oftentimes our NPCs. We got a guy who's got real jelly arms sometimes, along with a host of other problems. A jelly arm sounds like a euphemism, but not really, not by much. He's got weird stuff going on, and stuff that some types of people would not be very appreciative of, as in maybe he's got a little bit of an aboleth thing going on. It's not fun. It's not fun. It's not fun for him. It's not fun for us most of the time. It sounds good. If you turn this into a solo play guide, that would be cool. Yeah, the solo play guide is a little bit different because this is not handling. I touched on it briefly, but it doesn't really handle like what you do when you move into a new hex. Like those a little bit different. So this isn't handling that aspect of it. This is more like running for a group. But I am certainly do a modified version of that. Don't know that. And we talked a little bit about that earlier. But yeah, otherwise it's going to be pretty sane. Like you wouldn't be doing probably the morale skill challenges unless you really want to sit there and have your in-character PC talk to in-character to NPCs that you're also playing. So it depends on how comfortable you are talking to yourself in an empty room. Which obviously for me is not a problem. But for some people it is. Your players are RP shy with NPCs. They prefer to fast track it mostly. Yeah, it's also the style of game that you play. Kind of like what I said earlier. One of the reasons that we haven't done a ton of that in the current solo RPG adventure that I've been running is that hex crawling is not a super huge part of it. It's more about what I'm trying to model with that hex crawl is not knowing the area they're moving into, which is very different than hex crawl's kind of standardized mode, which is you have a home base and you're going out and you're looking for dungeons and places where there's money and loot and trying to, we'll say, liberate that loot from the monsters that might be living there. Yeah, I think it takes groups are really different. Like I definitely have players who are not super RP like in general. And so they're getting better because I keep forcing them to do it. They're getting better about it. But yeah, there's different levels for different people. Some people are way into it. Some people want to do a ton of RP, and some people don't want to do very much at all. Different people have different things they're looking for out of the game. So that's one of those balancing acts with a group where you're trying to be like, do most of these people like mostly the same style of play? If so, we can do that. If everybody likes really different styles of play, we're kind of all playing D&D together just because we can't find better groups to play with, which is usually a measure for a short-term D&D group. Usually somebody will get to the point where they'll be like, I'm not having as much fun as I feel like I should be having in D&D. And it's not a pizza situation where even bad pizza is still pizza. It's bad D&D can just be not fun if it's not the kind of D&D you like, which I am fully aware of. Having both run and played in those games, run games and be like, people do not, our style of D&D does not match. And I don't think you're going to be happy in this group. I'm happy to have you here and I want to run for you, but I get the feeling that you won't be as happy here as you could be. Let's see, what else we got down here? All right, so we're going to do that. We're going to set watches. That's all standard. We're going to do our overnight encounter check. That's all standard. Technically, this kind of just falls under. And it's just probably doesn't need. Probably doesn't. So one of the things that's is not listed here, but the reason that I do it this way with setting watches. I talked about it a little bit, but this is one of the things where it really helps with solo play. Is that if you are a solo character by yourself, you only need to make one of these checks. If you are with a standard group of 4 adventurers, each of them needs to make this check. Or really, whoever's on watches will need to make this check. The idea being that the larger the group is, the more attention they draw, the more likely they are to have an encounter overnight while they're camping. Because they make a lot of noise, they're big. It generally means a bigger group means that they're more lucrative, and that means that anything that's going to show up to attack them has enough numbers behind it to do so. You always skip ERP or just have it happen off stage. And players that, shall I say, didn't feel a little spicy. Oh, okay. yeah, I would do that. Probably too. Yeah, and really, I play in a campaign, the campaign that I'm playing in right now. My character is involved with one of the NPCs that's on the ship, and that's funny to have me and my friend, and very much off screen, and just be like, oh yeah, no, they're like those characters totally banged, like, all the time. It's like they're on a ship. Everybody knows there's only so many places you can go. Everybody's aware that they are doing that. But they have their own private cabins. It's fine. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, very much off screen. And this is from somebody who's currently running a campaign where they're in the middle of doing a side quest for a group of traveling prostitutes. They also had a fertility ritual that they went to for a spring festival, did all that. But yeah, all that spicy stuff happens off screen. We don't role play that out with my friends. So we do our watches, we do our overnight encounter checks, and we gain our long rest benefit. This is the thing that I'm going to change. Because I realize that that's untenable. This is untenable if they are not going to stop somewhere soon. The idea was to try to force them to use more camp days, but I think I'm going to change the way that this happens. So, ooh, not like that though. I'm going to say minus, so they're going to get the exhaustion levels back, but what I want to do here, and again, I will probably change this at some point. Do I even want to do that? The thing that I was trying to model with this is I want there to be, I want to make it so, and this is more of a travel issue, less of a hex crawling issue. That I wanted to get them away, players away from, and I'm lucky that I don't really have players that do this right now. That just alpha strike every single encounter. When you're doing overland travel, you might only end up with one encounter per day. But as we've seen with the solo RPG, I can also end up with like 3 or 4 encounters in a day. And there's a lot of like, we need to run away. Please run away. We can't fight these people. But I was trying to avoid them doing that. But, you know, just not much of a problem most of the time. Really just hasn't been. And I assume that that's probably, I'm overcorrecting for a style of play that I don't do when I run. Because when I run, I tend to throw relatively difficult encounters at players. But they also have a pretty good mix. So sometimes they're easy. I use morale rules, so combats don't take forever. Like, bad guys run away when they have the opportunity to start running away when they hit half health or the group is reduced to 50% size. Both of those proc morale checks at the start of their turns, which is a roll under. How I do it, so it's a roll under stat. So I roll d20. If I roll their charisma stat or lower, they stay in the fight. If not, they try to run or surrender. Sometimes they'll surrender if they can't feel like they can get away. But usually they're going to try to run away. And that will clear up a combat real quick when effectively you're now only dealing with like 2/3 to 75% of the hit points of most monsters. Combats are pretty much done in like 3 rounds. It goes pretty quick most of the time, which means you can have a lot more encounters in a day, which is what I like from it. But so I think my players have very much gotten to the point where they're like, well, you never know when another encounter is going to roll around the bend. And we want to make sure that we have enough spells and stuff for that. So I don't have to worry too much about 15-minute work days. So I think I am okay just striking this right now. I think this is more of an overland travel issue. I'm like, oh, you're traveling a long distance. There is no reason why you wouldn't be alpha striking every single encounter because you're probably only going to have one encounter per like day or week or longer sometimes, depending on how far you're going and the speed at which you travel. So that's more of that issue. Then it becomes, is this even worth having the encounter for if they do that? But that deals with overland travel. Like I said, I split overland travel and on the wrong sheet. I split exploration, like hex crawling, separate from overland travel. They're 2 different systems for me. So I do that very differently. So I don't think I have to do this. I will know that I think that will work. All right, guys, I'm going to refill my coffee real quick, and then we'll jump back in, and we'll finish out the last little bit of this and see if there's any additional changes I want to make. Maybe not. We'll find out. But you guys hold on. I'll be back in just a minute, all right? All right, we are back. Thanks for hanging out. Go do that. But now I am back, and I am properly caffeinated. Perfect. All right, hop back in. So, down here to our day's end, doing all this stuff. That now we have the morale skill challenge, which is optional. Day's end, BCs can take part activity to keep the group in high spirits, camp chores, entertainment, gear maintenance, etc., etc. There's a thing that I want to do more with gear maintenance. It's about resource die stuff, but that's like so experimentally in homebrew that I don't think that either of the groups that I play with right now would like it. It's very noodly. It's very me coded. It's not going to be for everybody. It's about like trying to make, because I wanted a system where like things like having leatherworking or smithing or having all these tool proficiencies were actually important gameplay wise, because they really aren't 99% of the time. When something more is like, oh well, what if I had stuff where it's like you need to keep doing gear maintenance. We already have a system in D&D 5e in which gear can be reduced by points to being fundamentally broken. One things that, and actually we just dealt with the Grey Ooze in our solo RPG. Grey Ooze is a great example. They do acid damage to most gear, and that gear then has a detriment to it. And then at some point, it reaches, like with armor, it's when the armor is reduced to AC 10, which for leather armor is 1 hit. But for something like blade armor is 8 hits. If it's reduced to 10 or it's below 10, one of the two, that piece of armor is just functionally broken. And what it does for things like swords and shields is very similar. So it's like, well, what if I had a system that focused on using that a little bit more, so that way, because right now the way that D&D primarily works is like, okay, we're gonna take a long rest, and then it's like, oh, does anything jump out in the night and try to kill us? No. Okay, we get up and keep doing what we were doing in the morning. Like, I want it to be a little bit more of a thing, and I just wanted more of that in the game, because otherwise, you know, at least for me, I feel that long rests are very much kind of like, it's a thing you do. It's like hidden save in a video game. You're like, cool, I get the save point. That's the entire reason I went to the end. That's very old school JRPG thinking, but that's the entire reason I went to the end, is because it's the save point. So I did that. Now we're good to go. Nothing else to see here. Like, this is an opportunity where everybody sits down and kind of talks about how the day went and things that are going well, things that are not going well, who's upset with who, that kind of stuff. Have the intra-party stuff, as well as feel like, hey, I'm doing this for the group. Like people who have like cooking utensils and being like, okay, I'm gonna spend some time and I have some spices. I'm gonna make a nice, like having the steward's spice pouch. Like, I'm gonna make a nice meal for everybody, and have that to improve their morality, giving them the ability to set their pace roll, which I might keep still, and just kind of use how D&D, unfortunately, has decided, or at least formally decided by its designers, that passive perception is just like the floor for perception rolls, and you can't roll less than 10, which I don't agree with. In this instance, being like, if you roll it to set your effort, you get to use that effort if you roll higher. Or maybe I'll probably just take the thing where it's just take the 5. So if you do it, then majority succeed, you get +5. If most people fail, you get -5. With the idea that not everybody has to do this. Even one person can decide they want to do that. So if you have a bard in the group and they're like, well, I want to tell a campfire story, they're probably going to pass that check 90% of the time. I mean, we'd know the math, but probably it's going to be really high. They're real good at performance. So if they do that, they're going to do a good job at that. They can be the only person who has to roll for it. Now, if they fail it, that might be when somebody else needs to dogpile on. Two other people got to be like, okay, what can we do that we can both pass on? Okay, I do this. Take a check. Pass. Okay, so you guys are at even. Do you want to try to go? Somebody else want to try to roll to try to get you to majority succeed. But not everybody has to do it. It's not like this one person over in the corner who's like, I don't really have any good tool proficiencies that make sense, and maybe we have like a Whedon style dice curse, and I'm like, I'm not really good at rolling for this kind of stuff, so I'd rather not. That's perfectly fine. And people are like, I just kind of do my stuff. Don't play into the morale aspect, and that's perfectly fine. One spell, mending, yeah, for the win, yeah. Yeah, mending's got a lot of upsides. A lot of upsides. And then the camp day, spending a full day in camp resting with doing no productive work can recover an exhaustion level. So we are removing that aspect of it. So this is more the stuff that I think that will end up being in. We're going to remove from this pretty much entirely. I just don't think that's going to be important. Break back. Delete. Line break. So that's where we're at right now. So I took some notes about stuff that's going on in 5e and 5.5 and just kind of standard hex crawling already. Is there anything in here that we haven't done? And I do like the declare destination or direction. I think I should put that in there. I'm gonna add this in here. They intended. Destination or direction. Right now, the way that I had things is they generally don't get lost very often. Mainly because being lost is not particularly fun in D&D. Which is one of the reasons why people don't do it very much anymore. It's not fun to be lost. Though, as somebody who is currently running a campaign that does have a very strong hex crawl element to it, and I didn't give my players, they're on an island. I did not give my players a map of the island. It's so funny that we've been playing this game. We're going into session like 39, 40, something like that. And at no point has anybody thought like, maybe I should draw a map of the island. Like, yeah, it might be useful. You could probably figure out where stuff was and how to get there very quickly. Instead, they rely on me telling them, which I tell them the way that somebody would just describe them in real life and be like, oh, the thing you're looking for is about 2 hours that way. Or is like half a day's travel that way. Or follow this road, and when you get to this place, you're going to need to go off-road, and it's probably another hour or two north. And because I use that league-sized hex, that 2.3 mile sized hex, that's what I consider an hour. So it's like, all right, it takes about an hour or two, or 1 to 3 hours, somewhere in there, depending on how fast you go and how you do it. But they get turned around often, and it's very funny, because I've never tried to actually try to map the island. You should do. Oh, what type of system am I using for morale? How do you apply it mechanically to the PC party? Inspiration for the party? Oh no, it's right here. This is primarily only for the camp aspect. And they do this morale skill challenge, and what it does is that it's giving them advantage on the set pace roll. So that's going to change some. So I think that's the thing that I was doing with it. So before I was taking 10 on this roll, they had to roll it. But because it really sucks when somebody rolls like a 2 on their day's effort, and they're like, I can go like 1 hex, and then I'm going to be done for the day. And then we have to camp again. While it might model something that's a little bit more realistic, be like somebody just gets tired or whatever, it's not necessarily fun to play at the table. They want to be able to get through like a few hexes, or at least be able to do a few things throughout the day. So I'm trying to change that up a little bit. So this is going to be like morale is high. Instead of getting advantage, it's going to be like a +5, which is essentially taking, that's roughly the number value of having advantage or disadvantage is ±5, roughly. If you read the rules for cover, and cover gives you a +5 in certain circumstances, that's where that +5 comes from. That's why they decided on +5. For tomorrow's effort. I'm gonna say daily effort. And the nomenclature of this is still party. I don't like it. It's poopy. But yeah, for morale. Otherwise, I don't track morale for PCs. As far as like doing combat, I don't think that's fun. I don't think people. Similarly, just like the camp days, is that as a dungeon master, like sitting there like theory crafting about it and like the experience that you're trying to model at the table, like it sounds fun or it sounds engaging or realistic in that verisimilitude kind of way. But then you get there and you see it in front of your players, and players are just like, oh, okay. They're like, oh, well, that's not the reaction I want. So I'm gonna change that. Like being forced to, just like the fear condition, to like run away from combat is not fun. And it also doesn't really play into heroic fantasy, which is what D&D is trying to model. Or the fantasy that it's trying to provide players. Like, oh, yeah, well, if that's the case, I don't want to do morale for that. So I just do morale from... And primarily that's so combat doesn't take as long. But also creates, in doing so, creates a lot of difficulty, potential difficulties for the party. Like they just had somebody try to get away, and then they knocked that person out and tied him up. And then as they were talking about them, you know, one of the characters is leisurely just like brandishing a knife and waving it around in front of them as they're talking to their companions. I'm like, when it seems like you're not paying attention, that guy makes a run for it. He tries to run away even though he's tied up, like his hands are tied up and stuff. He's gonna try to run. I'm like, you're just waving a knife in this guy's face. Like he's freaked out, gonna run. All right, so stuff we can pull from down here. So I liked this. And keep this. Set speed, we already talked about why I don't kind of use that. And pacing, fine. Like I can do low pacing. It seems weird because it's going to be counterintuitive. Like, because if you were walking in my system in pace, which is the D4 that you roll per hex or exploration action you're doing, if you were going quicker, you get into a weird spot where you're like, well, if I just roll more dice, then you don't get as far. So I can't do that. But if I roll less dice or put it at advantage, what is the detriment to taking quick pace? Now, one way you could do that is that it forced you immediately to go into saves. Which we can do. We'll put this in there. Where would I even put that? Feels like it should be in the kind of footnote section, but I don't know. I guess I should put it in here. It feels like it should go right in here. And like pacing, I guess we use pacing. I don't really like using the alternative pacing. Pace. So quick pace would be gain advantage. On effort roll, but immediately begin con save. Requires you to push. And we'll say of level. I think this will work. I think that will do the thing that I want it to do. Let me try to put it through its paces real quick. We already had the person who has a 14 con save, so let's just go with that. All right, so if they had a 14 con save, generally that they be able to get through, let's say. We can also just use 2.5. Yeah, well, not much this time, because they roll so poorly. They're going to be able to get through at least 5. Man, this is a tough day. Get through at least 5 hexes or actions before they have to start making con saves. And let's say that they were making a con save. They make an 18? Yeah. Alright, so they could get through, and that day they take 1 point of exhaustion. They go until they get 1 point of exhaustion. They get through 6 hexes or actions, whatever those are. So let's say that they were like, we need to go fast. So we're going to quick pace it, which means we're going to always roll with advantage, but I have to make a roll every single time. Pretty much can't screw that one up. Okay, we're going to take that. So I'll roll a d20. Basically can't get a 2. So we're good for the first few. And technically we could fail at 6. We don't, but we got very close to it. Alright, they'll pass that one. Alright, they still passed. So we're getting closer. 2. Okay, so they actually failed there. So they tried to push, and it didn't actually work out for them. They pretty much got exactly what they would get anyways. And that's considering that we rolled really, really low. It's definitely something that I'd probably need to really sit down and probably do this like 10 or 15 times to really just crunch the numbers and do that or figure out the math rhythm on it. That would probably be... Actually, I don't even know if that would be faster. That might be take exactly the same amount of time and just rolling a bunch of dice. Or taking the average of what those dice would be most of the time. Which just takes me figuring out what is the average roll of 2d4 drop the highest. Which there's a website, I can figure that out real quick. But I'm not going to do that right now. But good to know that that might work, but also I'm not sure if the math's going to support it. Certainly in that one example it didn't. But doesn't mean that it couldn't. That in that circumstance it didn't. And then we can go slow pace, which would essentially be the opposite. So you're going to basically gain. And I know that dropping the highest would technically be disadvantage, but advantage being the thing that is more favorable for the person. Effort rolls. But for this, I'd be like able to move stealthily or basically do an exploration action. And let's say attempt. And exploration action. Traveling. So this is one of those. If you want to forage, you have to move at a slow pace to forage. Now, that's upset by things like the ranger class that have very specific wording and ribbon abilities where it's like, hey, by the way, you can always forage while you're moving at normal pace. So thus, why it's useful to have a ranger. Also, can't get lost. Also, like all the other things that rangers are really good at that never seem to come up in most games. But if you start doing a lot more wilderness stuff, they're suddenly a lot more important. Like not being impervious to getting lost is really nice in a wilderness like exploration kind of game. It's in fact a little overpowering. So what I would just do then, and I think a lot of people do this, is like, which is one of the problems with the ranger class design in general. Is like, look at all the things you're so good at. You're so good at it, you don't actually do the things that you played this class to be good at. It'd be like, oh, I play a fighter. Well, great. You don't have to roll for attacks. Oh. Cool. That's neat. A lot of the ranger stuff kind of works like that. Instead of just making you better at doing stuff, you're just like, oh, you just don't have to do that stuff. But that's the whole reason I'm playing that character, is to do that stuff and be good at it. Not to bypass it. Okay, nope. And we lost this guy. So yeah, very much decreases danger avoidance. Ooh, I could do that instead. If instead of quick and pace, I like that a lot better actually. Since this one doesn't mess with your effort, this one probably shouldn't mess with your effort. So I think that you make a lot more noise, so you're more likely to run into encounters. Group gains disadvantage. Random encounter rules. I know. That could be different. I don't know. Maybe I should leave that stuff in. I'm just gonna put this stuff in there. Put little question marks before it. To remind myself is like, hey, that I'm not made a decision about the gun. It's a possibility. Group gains disadvantage on random encounter. I like that one because it's like you're moving fast, you're making a lot of noise, you're not taking your time. So I think that makes sense for you to be more likely to run into random encounters. People are looking to attack you. If you're running around, they're probably going to try to attack you. More likely to draw attention. And maybe that's a one. And in this one, they get to choose what they get out of it, or what they get bad. This is, here's the good thing you get out of it, but maybe you get to choose one of those. You get to choose which one. Are you just being really loud, making a lot of noise, or are you just hoofing it? You're like all out sprinting it, so it's likely that you will drop. Drop into taking levels of exhaustion. Maybe. I don't know. I won't get stuck there. Let's move on. Hex scales. Hex scales. Okay. I guess I should have something for hex scales. Be up here. We'll have hex scales and travel. Yeah, because that's one of the reasons I was using camp day. I forgot about that. That's dumb. It just hasn't come up because I haven't been doing it at different scales. But yeah, that does make it important. And I think the idea is fine. I think trying to figure out the way to communicate it using the rules of the game gets really muddy. What I'm trying to do is trying to do things like, how do you create something that's in between a short rest and a long rest? Mechanically. Which is a little bit closer to like the gritty resting rules of 5e, like one of the optional rules. But this will make sense as soon as I start talking about this. Or writing this down. Alright, so the hex scales, you have league hexes. You have county hexes. That you have region hexes. Then you have atlas hexes. So these are across. And the hexes are 10 nautical miles across. And regions are 60 nautical miles across. And atlas hexes are 420? No, it's 100, right? I've gotten out of the habit of doing the atlas scaling math often enough that I'm starting to question myself. Well, no, because it's 6 degrees. So yeah, it's 360. Because it's 6 region hexes across. I guess. So this converts pretty regularly. I mean, it's not perfect, but hey, what is? But roughly, it converts unintendedly. I wish I could take credit for that design, but it's just kind of how it works. So that's roughly 1 hour of travel, which is why it's named a league. Roughly how far you can travel in an hour. So if you have 10 of those, it would be like this is roughly 1 day of travel. Yes, you can travel faster than that. But the county hexes is built off a little bit about the... there's a great video by Mattman. No, it's not Mattman. Else. Very old YouTube video it talks about, hey, if you ever look at like pre-industrial cities, towns, you recognize that they are kind of spaced out at a reoccurring, pretty regular interval. And they're like, what's that about? It's like, they're roughly about 10 miles away from each other. It's so that anyone around in like a 5 mile radius can go to that town, do something, and get back home in a day trip. So it works pretty good for being like, okay, well, if it was there and back, plus presumably you did other stuff in the day, which could be breaking camp and setting camp, taking breaks for lunch, and all those kinds of things. And that would be about a day of travel. Obviously, the PCs will probably go faster than. Well, that's about a week of travel. When you multiply that out. And so, well, what happens if you have 6 weeks of travel? And then you get about a month and a half. Or 6. Or a month and a quarter. My calendar's slightly different that I use for my world building stuff. Because in ours, we had 5 days in a week. Remembering, I just had to. Oh, no, it's not in here. It's in the other one. It's fine. Yeah, it's 5 days. It's either 5 by 6 or 6 by 5. I'm almost assured it's 6 by 5. No, I'm not sure it's 6 by 5. All right, hold on. Let me get that. Why guess when I could just look? How about that? Calendar. Calendar. To me. There we go. Yes, 6 5-day weeks. Got it. So, yeah, it's pretty close. Again, it's not perfect. Whatever is, though. But we're pretty close to being in the pocket, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So, really, that would be like... I mean, that's a month of travel. Mine. So these work out really nicely for me. I was definitely not trying to do that. I was just like, oh, these actually ended up being really, really close. This worked out surprisingly well. Close enough that it's like, it's really not worth changing for me. I'm like, yeah, some of these don't quite make sense. Like, they'll probably go faster. This is like a leisurely walk kind of thing. But when I'm modeling like people moving at the county scale of hexes, traveling, doing things like exploring and traveling over land, be like, oh yeah, there's probably, because you have so many times that you're trying to stop and do stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you go down to the league level, they're probably technically going further than. But at this point, we start getting into larger areas of travel and be like, you can do wilderness exploration and be like, you are on a journey of like hundreds and hundreds of miles that you're trying to get to. And as long as you're going across places that you don't really know, and you're not following like a road or taking booking passage on a ship that knows where it's going, you can do wilderness exploration for that. I would probably avoid doing wilderness exploration in a ship just because the open ocean is mostly nothing. There's mostly not stuff there. Unless you're going to do something like the Dark Tides, which we ran. So if you want to check out Dark Tides, which is a wave crawl, yeah, but then that's more of a like Caribbean kind of feel. It's like, oh, there's a bunch of islands all over the place, rather than just vast open ocean. So we do want to do like just kind of like a roll modifier. Typically, local exploration is going to be measured in hours and days. By the time you get to like region level, you're generally not hex crawling. It's just not a mode of play that scales super well. Unless you're doing a thing where you're dropped in a perfectly vastly new world, like crash landed on a different planet or something like that. You could do that. But at some point you're like, why do you keep traveling that far out? Like you could come up for a reason to do it, but that would probably be so central to whatever campaign you're trying to run. Be like a major conceit of the campaign. Which would be something like maybe something like a Subnautica kind of thing where it's like, oh, we've crashed. Not in the space shuttle, but like maybe I mean, that's the beginning of Baldur's Gate 3, right? Spelljammer ship gets crashed. What if you were trying to repair the Spelljammer ship and you're like, we know that it needs, like Subnautica, we need these specific types of materials and we don't know where they are, so we have to slowly kind of in like a spiral out, keep expanding further and further and further our search radius to find that those more rare pieces of material we need to fix the Spelljammer ship and get off of this plane wherever we are. But again, that's an entire specific type of campaign or a large portion of a campaign. In general, hex crawling is going to stop after like League encounter. Just won't make a ton of sense. For high level adventurers to just be wandering around in the wilderness. That's a lower tier of play. And I do want to take some of this and change that out. So I think at this point we'll just talk a little bit about the situational effort. I think this will be do like going to be like terrain, biome, road. If we're going to do roads, weather is a big one. That's basically all of these. And does where you are affect random encounters? I'm inclined to say no. Because I already have a pretty low occurrence of random encounters when you're traveling anyway, so I don't really need to make it more. Now I could scale that, change that 1d6 to working like 1d6 does, looking for points of interest, where it's like if you're in the Heartlands, but why are you wilderness exploring in the Heartlands? But you could. You would be likely to run into random encounters all the time. Now, less likely those would probably be combat encounters, but you run into people all the time. And then less likely once you get out into the marches of frontier, and then standardly unlikely a 1 in 6 chance once you get into the yeah, like we talked about expending resources a little bit and tracking time. With interest, event trigger, that would be something that I would change, or that I would keep the same. Would be a good place to note that. I guess down here. Hex with an existing POI. Point of interest, by the way. Not guarantee discovery. I was gonna say unless you're on a road, but nope, there's plenty of points of interest that wouldn't even make sense to be anywhere near a road. Where's the POI occurrence? Again, this is why like trying to translate this from my own notes into something for other people to use becomes more difficult. I'm like, oh, of course, 1d20 versus POI occurrence threshold. Well, obviously, I know what that is. Do you know what that is? Maybe if you've watched enough of my content, you know what that is. Or seen me use the hex stocking document where I do that all the time. We are. That's, say, Heartland 6. Torches. 3 out of 6. Of course, doesn't go down to half. And then for our lovely, lovely wilds, that's a 1. And now it looks weird that it. But those are if you're rolling a d6. So if you're rolling a d20, you got a 1 in 20, a 3 in 20, or a 5 in 20 chance. So it's unlikely that you're going to stumble across them. Certainly, you need to take this exploration action to find it. Especially as you start moving into larger hexes, where it's like this hex is 10 nautical miles, or is what, 13 miles across? Sorry, 11.5 miles across. So the likelihood that you're going to just visually see it when you enter the hex is actually pretty low. We'll probably need to look forward a little bit. And I don't think we had expend. Yeah, oh yeah, when the day ends. Yeah, it's weird in D&D 5e DMG. They're like, oh, you can use 1 mile hexes. Then, like a few paragraphs later, they're like, oh, use 6 mile hexes. Oh, wait, what? But those are the scales that are in the 5th edition DMG, the one from 2014. Then it kind of gives you this idea that you should have 12 points of interest per 50 miles, but then at this point they've introduced both scales, and you're like, which scale is that though? Now the unfortunate thing is it has to be the mile scale, because you won't have 12 hexes. Mile hexes, you have like 9. So it has to be that. And that's roughly 1 site per 4 hexes, which is pretty good. I think that's a pretty good diffusion. And then they say like 50% of those should be monster layers. And so suddenly, if you, like, every 50 miles is going to have like 6 dungeons in it, that's a lot of dungeons. If you're using anything like normal level up stuff, they're going to chew through levels very quickly. I also had some stuff about weather, which are okay. Where you need to make some checks for extreme cold or heat checks. It still bugs me that if you have resistance to fire damage, that you are immune to heat checks. I'm like, that those are not, heat and fire are not the same things. You can still overheat even if you have the ability to be resistant to fire. In fact, you might be more likely to. And it's weird because if you are, I don't think if you are resistant to cold damage, I don't think you get the same effect for extreme cold, if I remember correctly. You know what? I got it up. I can look. I got it up. I thought that's always weird. Cover, mapping, weird locales, extreme heat. Oh, no, it does have it for extreme cold. I'm sorry, I misspoke. In addition to that, if you are wearing cold weather gear, you automatically succeed on that. But strangely enough, they don't give us in D&D 5th edition. They give us cold weather clothing, but not hot weather clothing. And you're like, well, they make clothing for hot weather too. All right. I'm trying to see if there's anything else. We're kind of running shy on time, so I think if there's anything else we want to look at. Encounter distance. I like this stuff. It's in D&D 5.5, and I think they got some in 5e as well. Maybe not. That was in there, but maybe. They also tell you to like check for random counters like every hour, or 4 to 8 hours, or once a day, and then once when you're camping. Kind of like whatever, do whatever you want. Okay, great advice for a dungeon master. Doesn't know what they're doing. New dungeon master. Yeah. But the stuff about like I like the encounter distance related to noise and visibility levels. I like that a lot. It's weird for it to be in this section because this was something to be in like an OSR thing. In the combat section about starting combat and deciding encounter distance and when you come across monsters, like how likely they are to attack you. Monsters being anything that's not the PCs. Very interesting. And extended travel from them is kind of the same thing for me. If you want to keep pushing yourself, you need to start making exhaustion saves. All right, well, I think that's pretty much it. I'll keep tooling around on this, but we've gotten a pretty good start on it. Like, it does change some of the things that I wanted to. I still want to figure out what I want to do about camp days. So in here, and I'm just gonna go camp day. But I think otherwise we kind of we hit most of the parts that I want to hit and help me kind of start to think about things that I want. So I think we're doing pretty good on that aspect. I think that's a good place to stop. I'm gonna keep messing with this, and especially I'll probably test out some of the stuff in the upcoming solo RPG session. So if you want to check these out and watch me screw up all these rules live, you can come watch us on Saturday with that stream. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me, guys. It is fun as always. It's nice to sit down and tinker around with stuff and kind of get my inside thoughts into outside words about how I want to change things and mess things up. And like a lot of the stuff that I do or anything kind of hacks I do to the game, it's always a work in progress. There's never truly finished. This I thought was finished and done, and then it hasn't been for a long time. And in fact, I didn't even follow the rules as I had typed them out for very long. So, but we are in the part where we're going to do the revision. I need to figure out the stuff about the paste, but otherwise, I think we made a good start on it. Still, just got some little tweaks I need to do here, and I would rather do those through play and try to figure those out, rather than me try to theory craft them just blindly. But otherwise, I think that's going to be it for me. Thanks for hanging out. We do these streams generally on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. It's kind of been the schedule I've been going on right now, so we'll hit this back on Thursday. Ideally, I'm going to try to have a opportunity to look at like Dolmenwood and Root and look at that on Thursday. If not, we'll probably do something else. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I have some potential ideas, but we'll stop and do. We might be looking at similarly like this. If you like this kind of content, we might be jumping in and looking at armor and my thoughts about armor and changing those up. But otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me, guys. I'll see you guys real soon. All right. Anything else is down in the description. You know how to do all this stuff. All right. Bye, guys.